Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Storytime with the Histrionists with your hosts, Jen Dumas and Matt Breen. And today we have episode 3, what we like to call Passport to Heaven. And what we're going to really be talking about are some of the interesting stories that come out of the Crusades, because there's a lot of information out there about what caused the Crusades and a lot of information about the 4 separate Crusades, but we don't really get the cool, fun stories in a history textbook that actually exist. And so that will be our focus today. Matt, what do you got for us?
Well, I've got a story about this guy, Godfrey of Balion, who becomes the first king of Jerusalem and the defender of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the reason I like this story is it throws a little bit of shade on the idea that the Crusades are all about just religious fervor, and kind of opens up a portal into viewing the Crusades as political opportunity. And it's a kind of just interesting story about a guy who kind of lives that from rags to riches dream that so many of us have become accustomed to overall. So here's the tall and short of Godfrey of Balion and how he comes to become king of Jerusalem. This is during the First Crusade, the year's 1099. Our source is William of Tyre. He was a monk who was in the city of Jerusalem. He was a witness to all of these events, so he's a pretty reliable source. And he basically relates to us that after the First Crusade had been won by the Christian knights, there needed to be some sort of leadership. The popes in Rome, the French kings in France, there's no real strong political leadership. So all of the noble men, all of these righteous men are gathered together in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the church fathers who are in the city start to lay out a criteria, and they're going to elect somebody. So let's think about that for a second. We're going to elect a king. This is a little bit before 1776, so kind of a revolutionary idea in the Western world, at least. So that's an interesting piece on its own. But really what's interesting about this is that Godfrey of Balion is probably not the guy that you would have expected to become the actual king of Jerusalem and the defender of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He was, by all accounts, a God-fearing man, but he wasn't a great soldier. He hadn't distinguished himself in battle. He was not politically connected. He was not politically motivated in any way that made you think this was the type of guy who was going to get power in France. In fact, he's the type of guy who would have probably amounted to being nothing at all if the Crusades not occurred. But what he's able to do during this church election is he's able to systematically go from candidate to candidate to candidate, and he starts to point out all of their flaws. Now, what's interesting about this is we wouldn't call these flaws. He starts to point out that some of these men are too powerful. Some of these men are too organized. Some of these men are too pure, that maybe there's something going on, like they're putting on airs or a show. And so he starts to turn all of the Christian ideals, all of the political ideals that we would say are these are what make a virtuous man, on each one of these candidates. And at the same time, he's able to point to himself and say, well, I'm not this well-connected person. I'm not this super rich person. I'm God-fearing, but I'm also kind of a sinner. And he is able to basically dupe the church fathers into defending him.
So, Matt, or is what you're saying, and I hate to make this connection, but it's kind of a little bit true. He's like the Trump of the Crusades era, portraying himself as the common man, and he's not like everybody else, and so therefore he'll be a better leader. Is that where he's coming from?
Yeah, this is kind of a populist type of ideal, this idea that you're the everyman, and because of who you are as this kind of common outsider sort of person, you are in fact the best candidate overall to be a leader. And the people who may have put in the time, who may have the religious connections, who may have had connections to the King of France or the Pope, these people are part of a system that is, I guess if we're using the analogy, a corrupt system overall. Now, the difference might be that this isn't a popular election where Godfrey needs to present himself out to the kings and queens of France, and he definitely doesn't need to present himself out to the everyday person living in the city of Jerusalem. What he just needs to do is show that he is extraordinarily ordinary in every way, shape, and form. And this is what's going to make him the best person for the job. All right, so Godfrey's able to convince the church fathers, the leadership inside of Jerusalem, to make him the king. And again, that big card for him is that he's just this ordinary, non-extraordinary sort of man. But after he gets into power, we do start to see from William and Tyre a sort of a spin almost on, hey, well, actually this guy is extremely pious. He is extremely learned. He is a master of military weapons. He is a master of military operations. He is going to be the perfect defender of the city of Jerusalem. And that's going to be important because if there's a first crusade, logically there's going to be at least a second crusade, and this is the guy who's going to be defending the city.
Oh my God, that's seriously a sweet story. I mean, being able to put the Crusades in like a modern day perspective with Trump, that's pretty impressive. And to know that there were people back then doing the same thing that President Trump had done in the last election, appealing to the common man and being successful, they're just showing that there's historical precedent for it. Interesting. Cool. Well, I actually tackled the Crusades from a different perspective. I tackled it from the female perspective because we have all kinds of stories in the Crusades about, men and bravery and fighting, but very rarely do we hear about the women. And there's actually some pretty interesting women who had a relatively significant role in the Crusades. And the first one I want to actually start with is this woman named Margaret. Now, this was Margaret of Beverley. Her brother Thomas is actually the one who tells the story. He was a monk in a monastery in England, and his story really paints Margaret in quite an interesting light. And it starts pretty simple. It starts with the fact that Margaret's parents were very pious Christians, and prior to the Seljuk Turks taking over Jerusalem early on, actually it's after the First Crusade where the Christians actually gained Jerusalem, that they had made the pilgrimage, and Margaret herself was actually born in Jerusalem. But she and her family actually moved back to England before the Second Crusade starts.
So the Second Crusades, that's going to be the one where Saladin, leading this massive Islamic army, is going to come and retake Jerusalem. This is where Godfrey's going to be defending. This is the everyman. This is this guy who has been extraordinarily ordinary, and now he's got to actually put it to the test against one of the greatest military forces of the time period.
Yeah, and Saladin was, like you said, quite the military general. And we obviously know from our study of history that Saladin wins the Second Crusade, and Jerusalem gets taken back out of the hands of the Christians and goes back into the hands of the Muslims.
Won pretty easily. That was not much of a battle at all.
That's what happens when you lie, people. It comes back to catch you. So a little bit more about Margaret. So basically, she decides that she wants to move back to her birthplace. She wants to move back to Jerusalem, and she does. And she's actually there during the Third Crusade. And if you remember from our study, the Third Crusade is where King Richard the Lionheart basically goes to battle with Saladin. And she talks about this siege definitely from a female and Christian perspective. And she talks about how she was like this tremendous force in the Crusade, the Third Crusade. She dresses in armor and carries weapons like a male soldier, and she's going around all the ramparts. She's helping the men with their wounds. She's giving them water. She's really acting like a male in this perspective, and I find it interesting that she felt she had to dress up like a soldier in order to be able to help her fellow Christians in the attack. I think that just does a great job explaining the biases that existed against women at the time. She gets hurt, or she says she gets hurt. Someone brings her medicine. The scar, she heals. But then she talks about the treaty, which we had talked about in class, the treaty between King Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, where basically the Muslims keep possession of Jerusalem, but the Christians would be guaranteed free passage on their pilgrimages to Jerusalem, and that's the way it ended. She sees it more as what she calls an unlucky treaty because of the fact that it put the holy places back into the hands of the enemy. She says she's taken prisoner, which kind of goes against what the whole treaty was supposed to create, so I don't know if her words are entirely true. But she eventually, if she pays a little tax money, she gets set free. But then her brother in this account goes on to say that Margaret didn't enjoy freedom for very long, that worse trials awaited her. They found themselves against the enemy again. She says that she was persecuted because of her love for Christ. She was forced into servitude in Muslim homes, but being the strong Christian that she was, she never gave up on her faith. Even when she was forced to take humiliating tasks. Eventually, she was, according to her, beaten with rods, but she eventually does make it home to tell her story. And the reason I like this whole story, Matt, is because you see the Crusades from a different perspective. It's not solely about gaining glory, it's not about gaining money, and it's not even really completely about Christianity versus Islam, as some people would like to point the Crusades to be. This is just more about a woman who has to take on the role of a man during the Crusades to help, and then because perhaps of that, and because of the fact she was a woman, how she was once again forced into servitude and then subject to beatings, so that you can see the status of women as lower reasserting itself after the crusade itself. And so, I don't know if I see Margaret as truly strong. I don't see her as being truly weak based on what she went through. I kind of see her as a flawed character. What about you?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I think, just as we were able to make a connection to modern political events and political events taking place in Jerusalem during this time, I think you can really see a lot of parallels on how we look at gender roles and how we look at the actions of people based on their gender and who they are and how their actions can be perceived by others. Because her story, again, is pretty ordinary in some respects if she were a man. What makes her story extraordinary is she's a woman, and she is actively breaking free of these social patriarchal bonds that exist, almost globally during this time period. And I think what's also interesting about that is that not only is she out of place for her time period, and we can make historical analysis, she's like 400 years-ish before Joan of Arc, before we start to see like this celebrated figure. Now you have a woman participating in this well-documented global event, and yet her story is kind of relegated to the back burner, and it's hard to think that that wouldn't have happened if she weren't a man. That's just seems to be another double standard in history for sure.
I agree with what your comment about the double standard, and I agree that it was extraordinary for her at the time. But there's actually an even more extraordinary woman, and this is one of my favorite stories from the Crusades, and this is actually from a Muslim perspective. So there's this guy named Shabib, right? And he is living obviously in the Middle East near the Holy Lands. And he has a castle in one of the regions, and there were Muslims fighting each other at this time, just as there were Christians fighting each other and Europeans fighting each other. And there's this one guy named Alwan, and he and his military conquer the land that Shabib lives on and actually take over Shabib's castle. And Shabib is like freaking out. He's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? And Alwan basically tells him, here's the deal. Go back home, grab the stuff you need, get out, and leave this land, and we'll call it good. We're not going to kill you, right? We've already taken the castle. We've taken the land. It's ours. You got nothing left here. Get out, and we'll call it even. And Shabib actually takes him up on his offer. He runs back to his castle, and he's talking to his servants, and he's like, find all the valuable things in this castle and give them to me. Right. And so that's what all these women do. The servants are the women. And as he was getting all of this organized, all of a sudden, someone wearing chainmail and a helmet, wearing the armor of like Muslim soldiers at this time, comes in. And Shabib's like, oh my gosh, this is from the rival forces. They're going to come and kill me. But what ends up happening is this person rips their helmet off, and it's his aunt who's dressed up as a Muslim soldier. And she's like, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? And Shabib, not really being all that intelligent in this moment, says, yeah, I'm taking whatever I can and getting the heck out of here, right? I'm done. I'm on my way. And the aunt cannot believe this is happening, right? This is still a patriarchal society, and guys are supposed to defend women at this time. So here's what she says to him, and this is a quote. What a wicked thing you are doing. You would leave the daughters of your uncle and the rest of your household in the hands of those cotton carters and just take off? What sort of life do you think you'd be living now that you've brought shame in the eyes of your family and fleeing from your family? And she goes on to say, get out there and you fight for your family and you fight for your family's wealth and the castle, and you're either going to be victorious or you're going to be killed. That's the way it's going to happen.
Whoa, wait. Okay, first of all, that's amazing, right? Good for her. Kudos to her. Way to stand up for herself. But you said he was going to take everything of value from the castle and get out of there. I'm assuming that he gathered up everything of value and was leaving when the aunt stops him. So he was going to leave his aunt. He was going to leave the female servants. So the things that are of value did not include his aunts, did not include these women. And the defender of that home is this woman who he was just going to leave, right? So that's insane to me that this patriarchal society, this guy, sometimes men measure their value with women, and he's just going to leave her and he's going to leave them on their own. They have no value to him whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a great story because this guy was seriously going to leave all these women, these family members. I mean, he had no idea what the rival forces were going to do to these women. And he was like, well, peace out. Got my cash, got my goods. I'm out of here. At least I'm alive. And was going to basically sacrifice the female members of his family. Not exactly what I would call a classy moment. But the cool thing is that Shabib's aunt is so persuasive that Shabib's like, all right. So Shabib totally stays and he fights. Now, he loses. Like, he's not a great fighter, so I totally get why, he was going to take off, but at least he stays and defends the family honor. And I just think it's so cool. I see this, tiny little, old Muslim aunt throwing off this helmet going, get your butt back in the battle. I just think it's a fantastic story and does do a good job showing the power of some women at the time.
The Crusades are definitely will do that, right? They're turning everything on their head. Expected roles, expected outcomes, expected alliances and groups of people working together definitely become twisted during this time period. I've got to just imagine that Shabib died, right? Do you know, did he die in the battle defending the family's honor, or did he somehow miraculously survive? Do you have any idea on the outcome there?
I don't know. My guess would be that he died because, dear God, he wasn't a good fighter, and Alwan was able to take over the castle. But you know what? I'm going to have to go look into that. I will get back with you on that answer.
All right. I mean, it would just be fitting. I would like to think that would happen. All right, to close this out, I got one more story of expecting the unexpected, keeping with this theme of things aren't going to end up quite the way you think they are with the Crusades. And this is also during that time period of the Third Crusades, Fourth Crusade era, and the Christians trying to regain the city. Because even with that treaty after the end of the Third Crusade between Richard the Lionhearted and Saladin, the Christian knights and the Christian church in Europe were not about to just give up. Richard the Lionheart was viewed as somewhat of a traitor to his faith and to his people, and the Crusades are going to continue on. But the reality is that same fervor that Pope Urban II was able to tap into during 1096, during that First Crusade, that's gone. And so people are looking at the Crusades now as an economic opportunity, as an opportunity for social advancement, political advancement. And so the quality of knight that you're seeing attracted to Crusades is much lower. And you don't have that everyman sort of feel where you have people taking up arms and marching across the fields of Europe en route to this unexpected victory during the First Crusades. And it's in this context that a really remarkable story that's going to have a long-lasting reverberation comes to us. And, of course, it involves the Mongols. How can you get away from the Mongols during this time period? So this story is a pretty short one, but it's something I definitely hope that we can explore in a little bit more detail later. This is from Otto of Friesenberg, and it's the legend of Prester John. Prester John is a fictitious person. We'll just say that right off the top. There's no evidence that this Prester John, this king in the east of Christianity, actually existed. But here's what we do know. We know that Crusade knights during the early parts of the 13th century, like the 1200s, right around 1215 or so, learn of this warrior in the East, this person who's connected to Christianity. Now, this is a different version of Christianity, Nestorian Christianity. But these Christian knights learn of this king who's battling against the Muslims, making his way west. And these Christian knights, according to Otto, send out feelers. They're trying to send out scouts to find this person. Now, it's very likely when you look at the source work, when you look at the dates, when you look at everything that's going on, that Prester John is actually Genghis Khan. And that these knights are thinking to themselves, hey, what we need is this true lion of the East, somebody to come and attack the Muslims on the other side to round up Salah ad-Din and to smash his armies. And so these Christian knights are going out there, they're looking for Genghis Khan, and they're essentially inviting him to come in and attack.
Oh my God. So, okay, just knowing the history of the Mongols, these Europeans are actually searching him out. And it's just funny because you know the Europeans have absolutely no concept of what the Mongols had done. They have no real concept of the brutality of the Mongols. So I'm just picturing these Christian soldiers going out looking for Genghis Khan. Like, what do they think they do once they found him?
They thought that this was going to work out just fine for them. But in actuality, we know that if this had actually, like, this contact had been made, there would have been nothing but trouble for the Christian knights. We know that when the Mongols finally do make their way into what is modern day Georgia, and the small, like 20,000 horseman contingent of Mongols runs into a crusade army of 30 to 40,000 armored knights, that it takes less than 1 month for the Mongols to completely destroy that army. I think that it's safe to say that the European knights are extremely lucky that they never made contact with Prester John, read Genghis Khan, and invite him into that battle. And it's just one of those like amazing sort of happenstances in history. Could you imagine the epic levels of violence and destruction that could have taken place in the Middle East if you had the Seljuk Turks, the Christian knights, and the Mongol cavalry all converging on that one open plain?
Oh my God, that'd have been a nightmare. Are you kidding me? I was just thinking about that. The idea of having the Crusades and the Seljuk Turks and the Mongols all fighting each other at once. I mean, that would seriously have been apocalyptic. That would have, I don't even know. I can't even begin to imagine the level of destruction that would have taken place.
We're talking like a WWE grudge match here, cage match, battle to the death. It would have been a huge disaster. Now, one of the reasons that I really like this story, and this is something I want to get back to, is even though the Crusades will end, and even though the time of the Mongols will end, the story of Prester John has staying power. And eventually, we're going to see this name come back up, and it's going to come back up again in the service of empire building, in the service of expansion, in the service of the expansion of the Christian faith. But that's a different story for a different time.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The Crusades, not just religious wars. We've got throwing Genghis Khan in there. We've got women as soldiers. We've got scary ants. Truly, the Crusades were full of absolute absurdity, but awesomeness as well. Once again, we want to thank you for listening to Storytime with the Histrionists. I'm Jen Dumas with my host,
Matt Borain. Thanks again, guys.
We'll look forward to seeing you next time.